It all comes down to this: the final impeachment vote on whether or not to remove President Trump from office. And straight from the Capitol, we have one of the judge/jurors. This is Verdict with Ted Cruz. The final vote has happened. Can I get a drum roll, please? The president has not been removed from office. Senator, you are so shocked and excited by this news that you're sitting there tweeting during the intro of the show.
Well, I am. I was just reading a second ago a tweet that says, in other Democratic comments, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee suggests that the Russians may be behind the Iowa Democratic Caucus app debacle. She mentions Russia as she tells FBI Director Chris Wray, "I hope the Iowa Democrats will ask for an FBI investigation on the app." And so I just retweeted it and made a very simple observation. Well, Bernie did honeymoon in the Soviet Union.
So your mind is now past impeachment. The impeachment vote has happened, and it turned out the way that we all knew it was going to turn out.
This was the inevitable outcome.
Yeah.
We knew this in October. We knew this in November. We knew this in December. We knew this in January. We know this in February. And we will know this 100 years from now. This impeachment was always a partisan circus. And it was always going to end with acquittal.
Right.
But it wasn't about convicting the president. That wasn't the Democrats' objective. It was about appeasing their base that hates him.
Do you
Impeachment and the Democratic reaction to the State of the Union last night are the same thing.
Huh.
It's like it's a different part of the identical phenomenon. Nancy Pelosi ripping the speech in half is the same thing as impeachment. It is all a giant FU, apologies, to Donald Trump. That's what this whole thing was.
But then what did they get out of it, I guess? If we always knew how it was going to end, and it was always a partisan circus, was there a political victory?
When you throw blood to the mob, it satiates the mob, at least briefly.
Right.
Or if nothing else, it gets messy. I mean, this was, look, beginning of last year, you had famed centrists like Nancy Pelosi saying, no, we can't do impeachment. It can't be partisan. It'll never succeed.
Even Nancy Pelosi didn't want to do impeachment.
You had that wonderful rock of moderation, Jerry Nadler, saying, no, we can't do impeachment if it's partisan. So what changed? What changed is their base got angrier and angrier and angrier. And ultimately, listen, I view Nancy Pelosi almost like a hostage tied up in a basement somewhere. A little ironic because we are in fact in a basement right now. But look, she was telling AOC, she was telling the squad, she was telling the fired up Bernie Sanders Bernistas, no, and they just couldn't fight him anymore. Mm-hmm. And so all of impeachment, one of the reasons I think Pelosi was so pissed last night is I think the Democrats have done real political damage to themselves in the last 3 months, and they've strengthened President Trump. I mean, if I were Donald Trump, I would send a letter to the FEC today, the Federal Election Committee, saying, "Dear FEC, I'd just like clarification. Do I have to declare Nancy Pelosi's actions as an in-kind contribution to my re-election campaign?"
It has helped his numbers. So then I guess this is just what's confusing to me. What you're saying is Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats had to go along with impeachment because their fired-up base demanded it. But the impeachment has damaged the Democrats, and it was always going to damage the Democrats.
I think that's right. And I think that their base has radicalized, and they have no choice but follow them off the cliff.
Now, there were some surprises today.
Yep.
We had been talking about, obviously, the president was going to be acquitted, but there were some swing votes in play. Mitt Romney was the biggest one, but also Doug Jones of Alabama, who's a Democrat, also Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona.
Right.
There were a few other votes in play. It was a completely party-line vote, except for Mitt Romney.
Well, let's take each piece of that. So this weekend, as you and I talked about, I thought there were anywhere between 50 and 56 votes for not guilty.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up at 52. Sorry about that.
It's been a long week.
It has. We ended up at 52. So the 6 votes that were in play, 3 Republicans, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, and 3 Democrats, Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, Doug Jones. I was right that Collins would vote to acquit. I was right that Murkowski would vote to acquit. I was wrong on Mitt. So last podcast we did, I told you I thought Mitt would be a not guilty. I also told you I thought Joe Manchin would be a not guilty.
Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia.
From West Virginia. And I said Sinema might be, that she was a plausible not guilty. And I also told you Doug Jones won't be. And Jones, I was exactly right. Jones is running in Alabama. It's a bright red state. Voting for impeachment is a terrible vote for Doug Jones. And I think he doesn't care. He's like the end of Dr. Strangelove, the guy on top of the bomb with a cowboy hat cheering as it falls. That's Doug Jones. Right. He's like, I'm losing, and damn it, I am going to be praised by every liberal in Alabama. And there are a few of them. They're not many. But he's going to be their hero.
Senator, do you know how I know that you are new to political podcasting? Is that you are actually holding up your predictions against reality. Normally, we just move right along. Doesn't matter. No accountability. Mitt Romney was the big story.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney comes out.
That surprised me.
We have a clip of it. Mitt Romney declaring why he's going to vote against President Trump.
As a senator juror, I swore an oath before God to exercise impartial justice. I am profoundly religious. My faith is at the heart of who I am. The grave question the Constitution tasks senators to answer is whether the president committed an act so extreme and egregious that it rises to the level of a high crime and misdemeanor. Yes, he did.
Your reaction?
Look, I think he's wrong. I think he is very mistaken. And I think that's unfortunate. I think that is a bad decision. I think it's bad for the country. I think it's bad for Mitt. And I don't think it's consistent with the Constitution. Now, that being said, every senator has to make up his or her mind. And then that is what Mitt has done. But I think that's a very unfortunate decision.
Do you think Senator Romney's decision to be the only vote to cross party lines, to vote against the president on only one charge, on abuse of power. He voted to acquit the president on the other charge, obstruction of Congress. But do you think Senator Romney's decision influenced some of those other swing votes on the Democratic side?
That's an interesting question, and maybe. When we started voting, so we voted today at 4. So we all came to the Senate floor. We got there a few minutes early. Mitch McConnell was giving a speech about how impeachment was all nonsense.
Yeah.
4 o'clock, the vote comes in. The Chief Justice comes and takes the seat, reads the first article. We vote. Now, the way we vote, every one of us stands up and votes either guilty or not guilty. Right before that started, it was interesting. Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema hugged each other. And I have to say, Sinema, who I like, I work with her, she looked pale. She looked haggard. I mean, it was noticeable. And I will say, another Republican senator was speculating with me if Chuck Schumer had taken them back in his office and strapped them to a chair and taken out a rubber hose on them.
It seemed as though it was in their personal political interest to vote to acquit the president.
So what's interesting is when Manchin cast his vote, I leaned over to David Perdue, sits next to me on the Senate floor, and I said, well, Manchin just announced he's not running for re-election.
That's what it seems like.
Look, West Virginia, this may be a worse vote for Manchin than it is for Doug Jones. I'd put West Virginia and Alabama side by side in terms of where the voters are on that. And I'm actually not shocked that Manchin would do that because I don't think he actually really likes the Senate. He used to be governor of West Virginia. Yeah. He liked being governor more. And this was a vote. I don't know how much Schumer pounded them. I actually wonder. The Democrats are much better at party discipline. I don't know what Schumer threatens. I don't know if he did. This is pure speculation. But it wouldn't shock me. So Romney announced earlier this afternoon he was going to be a guilty. And if Schumer hadn't gotten Manchin and or Sinema to flip then, I suspect Romney coming over, Schumer would have said, hey, you can't vote the other way because we need the messaging. I haven't even seen what the Democrats have said, but I'm sure they're all saying it was a bipartisan vote.
Well, that's what changes. This is why the Romney vote matters, is not because it was going to change.
No, it doesn't.
You don't think so?
There are 535 members of the United States Congress throughout this entire show.
That was a diplomatic choice of words.
I said the second half of the word. They got one Republican. 1 out of 535. So you'll forgive me for not being terribly excited that they got one. This was a partisan endeavor from day one. And the fact that Mitt decided to do what he did, listen, I don't really want to pound Mitt, frankly, because everyone else on earth is landing on him so hard.
I don't know if you've checked Twitter recently, but it's tough on him.
But I will say, one reaction I have. So I'm reminded of another difficult moment on the Senate floor. By the way, an interesting observation. Mitt, I think, sits at the same desk that I sat in as a freshman. Looking at that image of that clip, that's the same image that's behind me when I'm doing the Obamacare filibuster. He's really junior. He's in the back corner.
Those were very different speeches.
Very different. But I was reminded of another deeply disappointing moment on the floor, which was in 2017 when we voted on Obamacare repeal. And you'll recall we came one vote short of Obamacare repeal. Now, there's nothing I have bled more than taking on and trying to repeal Obamacare. And I haven't given up on that yet, just to be clear. But you'll recall 3 Republicans voted against it, and the last one was John McCain from Arizona, who put his fist out and sort of wiggled it for a minute and then thrust his thumb down. Yeah. And that was about 2 a.m. So actually, we should have been podcasting then.
Yeah,
2 a.m.
That's not Senate
our time.
That's podcast time.
Okay, we need to own 2 a.m. It's 2 a.m. Do you know where your senator is?
They have got to let you get to your second job.
That is exactly right. So I remember at that moment, and listen, John McCain and I, we became friends. I respect and admire him personally, certainly for his heroism, for his serving his country. Course. But I had to turn and walk off the Senate floor because if I had spoken to him that night, it would not have been language suitable for the floor of the United States Senate. It was an infuriating vote. But I want to draw a distinction. Let me contrast. So someone else, the 2 other no votes that night were Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. I had a very different sentiment about McCain's vote than I did about Collins's vote.
Why?
Look, I didn't like how Susan voted. But Susan was honest with her voters. Susan, when she campaigned and was elected in Maine, she never campaigned saying she opposed Obamacare.
Right. She's a moderate.
The voters of Maine knew what they were getting. She wasn't out there on the stump saying, if you elect me, I will vote to repeal Obamacare.
Yeah.
And so I disagree with her on that issue, but I think being honest with your voters and doing what you told them to is right at the heart of what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
What was so infuriating about McCain's vote, he had just been reelected, and he had run ads all across Arizona. John McCain leading the fight to repeal Obamacare. That's why it was so infuriating. And I got to say about Mitt, this ain't how he campaigned to get elected to Senate.
I noticed that.
If Mitt had wanted to tell the people of Utah, elect me and I will be a check on Donald Trump. I will stand up to Donald Trump. I will be a statesman. And you know what? If the people of Utah had elected him for that, God bless him.
But that's not what
that's not what he told the voters. And it's a pattern. The rage across this country. Washington doesn't get the rage across this country. That rage is what elected Trump. Is people were tired of their elected officials telling them one thing,
lying to their faces
on the campaign, and just flat out lying, and then doing exactly the opposite. And that I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with a Bernie Sanders. voting like a socialist. Look, his policies are loony and would destroy the country and the world. Right. But
other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how'd you like the play?
But he tells the people of Vermont that. Mm-hmm. I don't know. They're cold. They're smoking pot, and they say that sounds good to us. Right. I don't know, but it's at least honest. Mm-hmm. I think we need more honesty in politics, and this was not what the people of Utah were told.
You know, this actually brings us to another point, kind of wrapping up impeachment. You've talked a lot about Hunter Biden, Burisma, this corruption on the Democratic side, and other senators have gone along with this, but you always wondered if it was just maybe a little more opportunistic. What we've just heard, this is breaking news, Senators Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson have sent letters to the Secret Service requesting information on Hunter Biden's travel records. Obviously, you have been leading the charge to get to the bottom of this kind of corruption. Are there going to be enough other senators to go along with this, to get to the bottom of the Biden potential corruption, or is this just going to be forgotten?
I hope so. Let me say a couple of things on that. One, in the Senate and in the House, I think the political appetite for any further investigation diminished dramatically because Joe Biden is in free fall.
Yeah, he's fourth in Utah. He's falling in New Hampshire.
Iowa, actually, not Utah.
Utah. I'm sorry. I was still so fixated on Senator Romney. Yes, in Iowa.
Look, they're both states with 4 letters and lots of vowels, yeah. but different. Yes. Beautiful, but very different states.
I can't believe they say we don't know geography. You know, I don't know why they say that about us conservatives.
Biden taking fourth in Iowa, or who knows? I mean, we still don't have results because they still can't count the votes, but it is catastrophic for him.
Yeah.
What's going on behind the scenes, his donors are in panic. His supporters are in panic. His grassroots activists are in panic. His campaign staffers are in panic.
Yeah.
When you're built on being inevitable, placing fourth is kind of a problem.
Because that's the whole pitch for the Biden campaign is he's the most electable guy.
Right,
if he doesn't win elections, then that whole argument goes away.
And remember, we talked about in a previous podcast how when the House managers threw Joe Biden under the bus, one Republican senator speculated it was because the Democratic superdelegates had soured on Biden.
Right.
And we saw some of that, some of the fruit of that playing out in Iowa. What that means, there are not going to be a lot of Republicans in the Senate agitating for investigating further because Biden is politically speaking a dead man walking right now.
Right. Right.
That being said, look, rule of law matters. Biden was the vice president of the United States. The evidence we've walked through on Burisma and corruption, when I'm back at home in Texas and doing town halls, and I've done town halls in Texas and all across the country, people are understandably frustrated. A question you get all the time, how come nobody's held accountable? How come people break the law, people violate their criminal, there are no consequences, they get off scot-free? What happened to the millions of dollars Hunter Biden made? By the way, no one has ever answered the question that was asked during the trial. What exactly did Hunter Biden do for the $1 million a year? Like the managers are like, oh, we don't want to answer that. So my view is absolutely yes, there should be an investigation. Now, who should investigate? To be honest, there's a game of musical chairs in the Senate.
Because no one wants to do it.
Where no committee chairman wants to do it. It's got to be a committee chairman. I don't care if it's Judiciary, Foreign Relations, or Intel. I'm on 2 of those 3, and I am urging the chairman to call them and to investigate. But right now, you're not seeing any chairman rushing into that breach.
Right. And they control the gavel. They control the ability to investigate. But let me say, secondly, where's DOJ? Right. The Justice Department could investigate. We do have a United States Department of Justice that has these people called assistant U.S. attorneys, and they have grand juries, and they're FBI agents. When they're not fraudulently launching a case against the president and doctoring evidence to the FISA court to get wiretaps, you got evidence here of $1 million a year to the son of the vice president, with the vice president bragging
about getting the prosecutor fired. By the way, I don't know. So in my Senate speech yesterday, every senator got 10 minutes to explain.
Yeah.
And I quoted from what podcast listeners here know that I've affectionately referred to as the son of a bitch clip.
Yeah.
And Joe Biden on video saying, son of a bitch, he got fired. What I've actually asked my team to research, that may be the first time in history son of a bitch has been said on the Senate floor.
So you did not set the milk precedent that you participated in, but you may have set
I've
the
set
son
the
of
son
a
of a bitch
precedent.
precedent. Okay, that's really... And I'll confess what I asked my team, that they're like, oh, come on, someone had to have said it. And I said, look, the Senate's pretty old school. I'm not even sure we've had a malarkey on the Senate floor.
No, there's been a lot of malarkey, but maybe not a mention of malarkey.
But by the way, Michael, you did mention, I missed this tweet, but you told me that Donald Trump Jr., Don Jr., tweeted about the Iowa caucuses. I'm sorry, we were told there'd be no malarkey. That's funny. I didn't see Don's tweet, but that's really funny.
Spot on. Before we go, obviously, wrapping up impeachment, we need to get to some of the mailbag questions. Yep. Our listeners have been incredible. Now, we've been doing this for 2 weeks, over 2 million audio downloads, a ton of listens on YouTube. First question from Nicholas. Is the Verdict podcast going to continue? Or was this a short-lived gem of a listen?
We ain't going anywhere.
All right, I still have a job. This is great.
We will keep on going, and we're going to keep doing the same thing, which is trying to get to the bottom of issues, trying to engage in substance. This podcast was built on a proposition that you can attest. A lot of people laughed at us for saying.
Yes.
Which is that people really care about substance. They want to understand things. Now, look, people have jobs, they have kids, they have lives. They don't necessarily have time to spend days and days and days studying every issue. You got to deal with other stuff. Mm-hmm. But they do want to understand, all right, what's really going on? What are the facts? And I got to admit, when it comes to cable TV, I don't turn on the cable news stations. I get very little from people screaming at each other.
3-minute sound bites, yelling over each other.
And just the talking points, blah, 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 wah, wah, wah. It's like a Charlie Brown and the teacher
what they're
talking.
Say.
Yeah, it doesn't. So what we're going to try to do, we're going to try to address, number one, timely pressing issues right now.
Yeah.
But number two, also issues that matter, whether raised by the presidential campaign, raised by what's going on in the Senate, raised in the Supreme Court, or just issues that matter, socialism versus free enterprise. What's that all about? Those are sort of great bumper stickers. You can get all jazzed about them. But what does it mean? And I'm hoping that we do it with a combination of facts and insight and perhaps some perspectives that you don't necessarily get elsewhere. But also having fun. I mean, we're gonna, cut up and laugh and enjoy ourselves, and hopefully that means our listeners will stay with us.
Right. Before we go, someone has a new job recommendation for you. You've already got 2. Maybe you could have a third. From Lisa. Thoughts on a Supreme Court seat? I think Ted would be great.
Well, look, I appreciate Lisa saying that, and that's a question that I get sometimes. I will tell you the short answer is that I'm not interested in doing that.
Really? Why not? You've worked in the Supreme Court. You clerked. You have argued cases before the Supreme Court. I admire the Supreme Court. I think it's massively important. The big reason, and when I've said this to people, they sometimes don't believe me, but I think a principled federal judge stays out of policy fights, stays out of political fights. Yep.
If I were a judge, that's what I'd do. If I found myself on the Supreme Court, I would follow the law and I would follow the Constitution.
Even if it doesn't go along with your particular preference on any given issue.
And I don't want to stay out of policy fights. I don't want to stay out of political fights. I want to be right in the middle of them. And the right place in our constitutional system for that is the Senate. I mean, the Senate was established for that. And so, listen, I would like to be part of nominating and confirming 2, 3, 4, 5 strong, principled constitutionalists to the Supreme Court and to the lower courts as well. I think it matters massively. But I don't want to pull out of the fray.
It's too much fun.
And frankly, when I
much.
look at the Senate, and no disrespect to my colleagues, but I don't see a whole lot of people leading the fight.
Right.
And if we're going to win people's hearts and minds, we got to be prepared to engage and fight. And that's what I want to do. And I'll tell you one part of it also. So this is not an entirely theoretical question. For both of the last two Supreme Court vacancies, for Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, the president and I had very serious conversations about the seat. Extended, especially for the first one, the Gorsuch seat that was Scalia's seat. We had, the president and I and his team and I talked for probably 2 hours about it.
Wow.
And I don't want to overstate it. He didn't offer me the job, but it was a really serious
He didn't talk to me about it, so this is a little bit
that
closer.
may be the next one.
Then maybe the next one.
I can see you as a Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, it'd be a good look for you. And I'll tell you, I wrestled with it. I thought about it. I actually spent several weeks with Heidi. I mean, we were praying about it. I mean, that's... I revere Antonin Scalia, and to have the possibility of filling his spot, like, holy cow, that it's one thing to say it theoretically, but when it was being discussed for real, you really have all right, let's think about this.
It's a humbling experience.
And I came very much to peace. So I told the president in both instances, I'm not interested. I don't want the position. No, thank you. He didn't offer it to me, but I made very clear I didn't want it. When I was thinking about it during the first discussions, one of the things that happened, my pastor came over to the house. It was a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and spent a couple of hours talking through with me. And I got to say, among my close friends, almost everybody was saying, "You're an idiot." What is
I wasn't
going
to say it, but
I got a lot of that. It was interesting, my pastor's take on it. He said he understood, because I was from the very beginning very hesitant and pretty sure I didn't want to do it, but I was agonizing because it was becoming a more real possibility. And my pastor used an analogy. He said, if someone came to me and offered me the opportunity to be the leading theologian in the world, to go to some divinity school and drive theological thought across the planet, but I'd have to give up being a pastor. And I couldn't meet with the members of the church. I couldn't visit them when they're sick. I couldn't. He said, you know what? I'd turn that down. And it matters a lot. I want good theologians to think, but my calling, my passion is to be a pastor. And I have to admit that analogy resonated with me. And I want to be fighting for conservative principles in the Senate, winning these fights, and also, one of the things Ted Kennedy did, Ted Kennedy was a lion of the Senate, and he trained generations of left-wingers who went and populated all of government, did enormous damage to the country.
Right.
I'm working very hard to train young conservatives, libertarians, to go and fight for the Constitution. That's a lot of fun, and I'd rather do that.
Not just in the Senate, but here. I'm glad you're staying in the fight in both places, and we've got a lot more to get to because we've got the final verdict on impeachment, but I'm glad to say we don't have the final verdict podcast, and we will be back with a lot more to look not just backward on this farce of an impeachment trial, but to look forward at what is at stake coming up. Thank you so much to everybody who has made this podcast such a big success. Please head on over, if you don't mind, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review, and we'll be back with a whole lot more. I'm Michael Knowles. This is Verdict with Ted Cruz.